Good evening from Washington. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. President Obama continues his trip to Asia, and the Asia-Pacific trip now includes a significant pollution controlling agreement with China. Our chief White House correspondent Suzanne LaFranchi reports. Suzanne?
Good evening, Brian. Now, this groundbreaking agreement between the United States and China may be a signal that the world's two worst polluters are becoming serious about controlling emissions. While the Democrats are calling it landmark public policy, the Republicans say it's nothing more than a hollow jobs killer. The second leg of the Asia-Pacific trip had the president attending a gala dinner at the conference hall with Myanmar's president. But the news overnight has come from the president's time in China, where a surprise climate pact was announced, an agreement that was the focus of months-long secret negotiations. The president said the two world powers have an obligation to act.
As the world's two largest economies, energy consumers, and emitters of greenhouse gases, we have a special responsibility to lead the global effort against climate change.
The pact came as a pleasant surprise to environmentalists.
It's a game changer, and it will set off a set of dominoes. The U.S. and China are half of global emissions. Now we need the other half.
Under the agreement, Obama set a goal to cut U.S. emissions between 26% to 28% by 2025. In China, pollution is a major problem and continues to escalate as it builds new coal plants. The Chinese have agreed to set a target for their emissions to peak by 2030, a concession so the Chinese economy doesn't falter while working towards those goals. In Washington, Republicans fresh off their sweep in the midterms that gave them control of both houses are not happy with the accord.
I read the agreement requires the Chinese to do nothing at all for 16 years, while these carbon emission regulations are creating havoc in my state and other states around the country.
Now, the agreement does not require congressional approval. However, Republicans are quick to point out that they could act to undo some of the president's authority. Back to you, Brian.
All right, thank you, Suzanne. And Lonnie Ellis is the Associate Director of Catholic Climate Covenant, a group promoting Catholic teaching on environmental stewardship, and a third-order Franciscan, I might add. What's your assessment of this climate deal?
Yeah, well, we have the two largest emitters coming together and making a positive step like this. I think it starts to meet our moral obligation to our sisters and brothers around the world. When these two countries have been the main blockers of any kind of international agreements.
Is there enough substance to it, though?
You know, I think symbolically it is a huge step that can then boost our international talks that are happening, coming up in Lima and Paris, and I think it actually has a lot of substance for that power right there.
What else, though, would you like to see in this agreement, something that, you know, is a little more tangible?
Well, I think, you know, there are so many struggles even to getting anything through the U.S. right now that I don't think there's anything more that really could have been said or done in terms of an agreement that either of these countries probably could make, but especially our own, when even for us to make the step of the first ever limits on carbon pollution from power plants are under such heavy attack. Something that the U.S. bishops have said, you know, let's go ahead and put some limits on carbon pollution, first ever limits on carbon pollution. And, you know, even that is being very difficult for us to accomplish here.
Let's talk briefly about the Catholic teaching about the environment. There's a lot of confusion about it.
Right. I mean, I think there's not so much confusion from the church, right? I mean, going back decades now, the past three popes have been very clear about environmental degradation and how it hurts the poor, and naming climate change in specific. I think the confusion really comes from our national leaders, who there's kind of a junk drawer list of excuses for why we shouldn't take action. You know, we don't believe the scientists, or, you know, anything that would happen. You know, China and other emitters would just kind of negate anything we could do. You know, I think the confusion is really from our own national leaders. We don't know where to look if our elected leaders are talking like this.
But the church is very clear that the earth, the planet, is God's creation, and
Absolutely.
We're to be stewards of that, right?
Absolutely. The earth is the Lord's and all that it holds, from Psalms. It's a beautiful way of spiritually looking after all of creation when we look at it that way. But I think we often think the environment's out there. And that's why I actually think we should talk about climate change as a human issue much more than we are, right? It's about our sisters and brothers around the world.
it would probably reach more people.
Absolutely.
If you approached it that way versus more science.
Absolutely.
That a lot of us don't even understand. Why do you think there is so much resistance to this theory of global warming, climate change?
Yeah. You know, again, if our national leaders are saying we don't believe the science, or you know, this is going to kill all kinds of jobs for us, without kind of talking anything about a moral obligation to future generations or to our brothers and sisters, I think that's going to be very confusing for us, and I think it's hard. You know, so I'm a lay Franciscan, and so I've made a commitment to live simply, but I do that with a group. There's a group of us who do that and inspire one another. And if our national conversation is, no, you don't have to, don't worry about that. Don't worry about those people in Africa suffering from famine. You know, if we're not in this together, it's very hard for us to move forward.
All right, well, we appreciate your insight from Catholic Climate Covenant. Lonnie Ellis, thanks for being with us.
Thanks a lot.